Welcome everyone. My name is Philipp Salvisberg. I'm a database-centric software developer at Trivadis. In my daily work, I help customers in various areas. Improving developer efficiency by extending the Oracle SQL Developer is just one of them. You can reach me via my blog, GitHub, Twitter, or LinkedIn. So what is SQL Developer? It's the featured richest IDE for Oracle databases. It is not a single executable. It's a collection of about 60 extensions. So it's extensible by design. There are several updates per year. So please make sure you use the most recent version. You get SQL Developer for all kinds of platforms. You get also a documentation. The documentation is available online. It's available as HTML, as PDF, and it's also included in SQL Developer. If you cannot find an answer here, then please go to the forum, to the Oracle forum, and ask the questions there. Some fellow may answer them. And if you think it is a bug, then I think the best is to open a service request directly. You can extend your SQL Developer in various ways. One is to add your own code snippets. Another one is to add your code templates. That's a similar concept, but it's a bit more powerful. It supports also the replacement of parameters, and it's embedded in Code Insight. Another option is that you write your own Java extension, your own OSGi bundle, one of the 60, an additional one as one of the 60 SQL Developer comes with. Or you can use the AutoGen generator and add your own code generators there by PL SQL and soon also in JavaScript. Or you can write your user-defined extension, which is the topic of this talk. So user-defined extensions are based on XML schemas. And there are 4 types of user-defined extensions. They are listed here: reports, editors, Navigator, actions. I will talk in detail what they are. What is interesting is that they are based on XML schemas. You see the schema name here. And interesting also is that some of them use exactly the same schemas. So based on this information, you know they must be very similar. And in fact, they are very similar. Reports and editors are almost the same thing. Reports is very good included in SQL Developer. You will have wizards to build them, to edit them, to run them. All other extensions you have to manage based on their XML source. So therefore, it's worth to spend a bit more time about reports and explain how they work, because this will help you with editors as well. And then we will spend also some time about navigators and actions. Let's look at reports. You can open up the Reports Navigator view via the menu. And SQL Developer comes with a lot of default reports. In this section, we see the Apex reports. Here, pages. Then the details are shown for pages. This is a table grid report with childs, several childs. In fact, the region report is shown here. So for this page, all the regions are shown. And on the other side, we see a chart report regarding ASH statistics. That's also possible. So if you want to provide a report, you have several options. You can write the Java extension, and then you can place it wherever you like in this Navigator tree. Or you can write the user-defined extension, or in fact, the user-defined report, and then it is placed here in the shared reports area. When you create the report, this thing happens under the node user-defined reports. There you can change reports. In all other nodes, these are just read-only, and you may execute these reports. How do you create the report? You can start from scratch, new report, and follow the wizards, and you're done. It's a lot of work. Not really, but you start from scratch, and it's a bit more work. Then the other option, choosing an existing report, copying it, pasting it into the user-defined reports node, and then edit it. This is a very nice feature if you just see a report, for example, pages report, and you want to change something, add an additional child report, something like that. And the third option you have is you can create the report from a result table grid. Everywhere in SQL Developer, you see a result table grid. You can right-click and you see the option Save Grid as Report. Then you see the query, and you may create the report out of it. I use this option also just to see what the query is behind, especially for standard table grids, not the ones I just run in the worksheet. Styles. We've seen some styles, table and chart. I want to mention another important style from my point of view, that's script. You can run SQL Plus script or better SQL CL script from a report. That's really interesting for all the DBAs and developer who has tons of existing SQL Plus scripts. They may integrate them in SQL Developer quite easily. So you choose here the style you want. And based on that, you get some additional options to fill in. On the next section, you have the option to enter a query. So a query is really the correct name for when you create a table grid-based report or a chart. But when you write the SQL Plus script or SQL CL script, then this is not really the appropriate name. However, that's your source of your report, and you have to fill that in, and you're done. Everything else is optional. Everything else is more configuration. On this screen, you have an additional option to show SQL variants. This means that you get an option here to enter for which Oracle version ranges this SQL is valid. So you may, for example, leave it if you create the PL scope report, which works only with 12.2 and upwards. You can just say the minimum version is 12.2 and limit the scope for that. That's nice. But you can also deliver multiple versions of the same query, of the same report. For example, if certain columns are just visible in a specific Oracle version, so you can provide two queries, one for version older, like here, up to 11, and one for 12 and newer ones. This is useful when your reports are based on the Oracle Data Dictionary views. There are other features in reports which are worth to mention. The first one is the go-to feature. You have the possibility to create a context menu enter to jump to another editor in SQL Developer. So when you have here a report about tables, you say, I'd like to open up the table details or the view details or the PLSQL editor associated with. And to make that happen, you just have to provide 3 additional columns in the report. They have a special name, SDEF link owner, SDEF link type, and SDEF link name. Based on that, SQL Developer knows which editor to open for that object. The results are not shown here, they're just hidden. They are just used to create this context menu entry. That's nice. There's even a nicer option in my point of view, that's the hyperlink column, because the hyperlink column is immediately visible in the report grid. I don't have to right click and select something from the context menu. I see it and may click on it. It works similar. You have to provide a column which starts with SQL Def, colon, link, colon, and then you define again the owner, the type, the object name. Yeah, you define then a Java class which does the drill down magic. You just have to enter that, but it shows you the magic, that the power that you may define your own class and do whatever kind of navigation you like. So it's really, really a powerful feature. Then you have also the option to create the gauge column. You know that maybe from the table space report where you see how full the table space is, and you define some ranges here to make that green, yellow, or red. Of course, when you write reports, you have also to enter bind variables, parameters, and you may do that as well. You name them, and you may define a default value, and default value are very useful because then you can just start the report without entering a lot of data. What's not possible is to add a list of values or some kind of stuff. That's not possible within reports. Then what we have seen in the first screen, you can create child reports, parent-child reports. So for a child query, all result columns of the parent query may be used as bind variables. So it's very easy to define them. And as you've seen previously, you may define many child reports for a parent. Parent-child reports are limited. They are in fact just parent-child reports. It's not possible to define a parent-child, friend-child report. If you want to implement such kind of navigation, you can use drill-down reports. With drill-downs, you create the context menu entry, and then you can jump to another report, and from there to another. There's virtually no limitation in that navigation style. And then what I want to mention is not really the PDF setting. The PDF settings allow you to define some properties when you in fact export your result to PDF, but you cannot only export it to PDF, you can also export it to simple text, to Excel, to HTML, as insert statements, as loader script, as XML, as JSON, as a delimited file with whatever you like, or as classical CSV. So that's possible out of the box with every grid result of a report. And that's really cool. How do I save a report to a file, make an XML export? I just go click on the node of a report and say save as, and then it will be exported as an XML format. It's also possible to create folders and group reports, how you like them, and export them as a single XML file. That's helpful for sharing, but when you edit reports or manage them in a version control file, it's probably better to do that on a report base. The other operation is to import a report. So you open some XML report file and want to import it in your work area. And I talked about the work area previously. So this is in fact a file, and other XML files stored in a dedicated location, ID pref dir. So what the heck is the ID pref dir? It is version specific and OS specific, and in fact not version specific, it is environment specific. So let's look at the about dialog, and there I can look up the ID pref dir. Here it is. I paste it here. In fact, I just want to go to that directory and show you what I found here. And I see here the user reports XML. I see also the code template XML, and I see various directory which are configurations for SQL Developer versions. So these file user reports is automatically applied to all installed versions of your SQL Developer on your system. How does an XML source look like? It's a very simple report. It's based on a select star from all objects, blah, 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 that's it. And the type is defined here as the style of this display section here. It's a table grid. And the table grids can have sub-styles. You may have them horizontal or vertical represented. The PDF node is collapsed, so that's really all you see here. It's not a lot. You may afterwards, when you export it, manage them in a version control system, and for changes in the SQL statement, I find it even easier to do that directly in the XML editor. How do we install reports? We do that in the SQL Developer Preferences dialog. Under the database node, user-defined extensions, you add a row for every single entry. So you don't have to do that for every report. As I said, it's possible to group reports to folder and just export hundreds of reports in one XML file. But you have to enter this file at least. This has to be stored somewhere on your system, and you enter that, and after a restart of SQL Developer, it is available here under the Shared Reports node. Now editors. Editors are just reports associated with an object type. When you look here at the connections window, the depth table has been selected, and on the right side you see the details for this depth table. And what's highlighted here are the constraints. And every tab you see here is an editor. Behind the scenes, it's just a report. You see a parent-child report, a table grid here, table grid below. That's it. So an editor is just a report associated with an object type. There's another way to open such an editor. When you are in a worksheet and you type in a name, for example, depth, as before, I can right-click, and at the very end of the context menu, I find an empty Popup Describe. When I click on it, I get the details. And again, these details here are editors. The very same editor is shown here. So what are the differences, in fact, between reports and editors? They are very similar. They are based on the same schema. And I placed here on the left side the reports. The reports come with an ID. This ID is important when you run a report and you have bind variables. These bind variables will be stored per ID somewhere else in the SQL Developer Preferences. So your report will be left untouched, but this information here helps to associate the latest used bind variable values. Editors do not need them. Editors don't have bind variables. Instead of bind variables, they are associated with a list of object types. In this case, this editor is associated with a table, with a view, with a package body. These are the object types we know from the data dictionary. And then, of course, I have some identifier here. The type is left empty for reports, and for editor, it is an editor. That's the difference from an XML source perspective. So the next question is, what kind of object types I may use here? Basically, every object type you may think of is possible. Here's just an excerpt. You see below a link to a GitHub repository of the Oracle database examples. There are a lot of useful information there. There are the schemas stored there as well, and you see here how to find out the names for various object types. Bind variables, how do I get them, or what bind variables are offered for my editor-based reports? So it's column object owner, object type, and object name, and based on that I can reduce the result, for example, for this one to a single row. There's a nice feature in editors which are not available in reports. And when you create a report based on sys.all whatever, or any Oracle data dictionary view based on all, will be transformed to replaced with a DBA alternative, because when you have access to DBA's views, these views are a bit faster. You don't have to check if you are allowed to see that object as a DBA. When you have access to the DBA's views, you may see everything. So they are a bit faster, and therefore this optimization takes place. You don't have to write your DBA code and handle it somehow. You just may use all objects, and it will be fast too if you have DBA privileges. Installing is in fact really the same as we've seen for reports. It's just another type, or of course another file. You have to restart to make the editor available, and that's it. Okay, demo time. Let's look at some user-defined extensions. I opened here the connections window, and when I click on a table, I get the details. All these editors here are shown. At the very end, I see two own editors, user-defined extensions. This one is showing a table grid, vertical represented, with some properties. And I have a second user-defined extension as an editor, and this is showing not the table grid, it is showing the result of a SQL CL script. In fact, it's Daniel Potter's AshTop script, which is designed to be run on the SQL Plus. I can click also on the view, and then all editors associated with the view type are shown. And here I see also the properties. Vertical represented looks good, but I do not see an AshTop editor. Why? I will show you that later. I can click also on a package, then the associated editors for a package is open. That's the code editor, that makes sense. At the very end, I see also my properties user-defined extension, this time horizontally represented. That's not what I wanted, but at least I see it. When I click on the AshTop, which is not at the end, it does not work at all. I consider that a bug. However, there's a nice workaround. You can open a worksheet, and there you can enter an object type, and an object, in fact, the type is identified automatically by SQL Developer, and I can click on Popup Describe. And then I get the details, all the editor associated with that table. Here again, I see the properties as before, and also the AshTop result. I can do the same with the DDUtil package, which did not work before. I click on Popup Describe, and then I get at the end the properties now vertically represented as I wanted them, and the AshTop result works here as well. Where is that stuff defined? It's in the preferences under the database node, under user-defined extensions. There are some defined already here, and I see here the editor and the AshTop script. It points to a local file where I store these user-defined extensions. It's a clone of my GitHub repository, SQL Dev. It's public. You may get them and play around it after you watched that talk. so everything is available. A question I get a lot is why store that stuff on the local drive? Why not on a shared drive? Would be easier to share and update it. Yes, that's technically possible, but it's dangerous when the shared drive is not available. SQL Developer has problems to start up. So it's better to have everything locally stored. It's more reliable. You always have your extensions ready, and I recommend to do it. For synchronization, use another mechanism like rsync, or as I do here, Git repository. So let's look at the content of these files. I can do that also here from SQL Developer. Let's look at the properties first. It's of type editor, the style is table, and it is vertically represented. I see also here the query, vertically represented, makes sense for single rows only, and it's limited to a single row based on these bind variables, object owner, object type, object name. So I just get the details, the properties for a single object. Which object types are supported? That's defined in this list, and it's really a long list. So you see, it's not really limited. It works for views, it works for tables, and it works for packages. That's what we've seen before. When I open the ashtop script, it looks similar. It's also of type editor, but this time the style is script. This means it's a SQL Plus or a SQL CL script, which is expected here. The object type is also defined, but it's a much smaller list. Only packages, types are defined, but no view. And therefore, for view, I did not get the details. But what I see here, it's also possible to define it for a table folder. So I can run that, I can show that. I have to be on the folder. Open it here. So maybe it makes more sense to define it at that level. And what I see already, there are two editors. The first one, based on a query which is sometimes really slow, it shows the details of all these tables I see here anyway. And the second one is my ashtop script. So let's jump back to the ashtop script because I want to show you two things. You see here the directory where the script is stored is hard-coded. That's not that bad for an editor. But what you see also here is that I call the script with hard-coded value. Again, that's not that bad for an editor. I don't want to be prompted every time I click on an editor. But when I want to run a report, I would like to have bind values for them, and I want to be prompted for them to change them. That brings me to the reports, and I've already imported under the shared nodes Daniel Porter scripts. Some of them, he has 500 in his GitHub repository. It's only 6 here, and the ashtop is one of them. When I click on it, I will be asked to select a connection. I do that, and then I prompt it for bind variables. And I see here, I get also an information, that's the date time expression. So I may change that to the last 6 hours and run that script. When I want to edit them, I cannot do that from here. I have to do that in the user-defined reports section. So first of all, I have to import them. I read the very same stuff I've imported above here into the user-defined report section. No, I don't want to run it. I want to edit them. And I see here the query. In that query, it's interesting to see that I converted all bind variables to substitution variables. That makes it possible to use it in the scripts like here to make the change directory dynamic. That's probably not really necessary, but what's necessary is to pass substitution variables here for the ashtop script. That makes it dynamic. And I do not have incorporated Daniel Porter script here in the SQL query. in SQL Developer, because then I would have to synchronize them manually. This way, I just call the script, and if Tunnel does some enhancement or bug fixes, I just have to refresh my local storage of the GitHub repository, and everything works fine. As long as he doesn't change the API, the bind variables, I'm good. I can click also here on the bind variables, and I see how they are defined. There's also a nice feature. I may test the reports within here without saving it and running it. And then we ask about the parameters as before, and I can do as long as I like until I'm ready and I feel the report looks good. Navigators. What are navigators? Here's an example. This is the connection window, the connection name, and below we see a list of nodes. These nodes are navigators. So this soft strings here with the caller, font, and sprite, this is one navigator. So a node with its children, an object type, a known object type. How is that defined? How does it look like in the XML file? We have a new node navigator, closes here, and below that I define a new object type. I define where it is visible, so this one is just visible for Oracle database, and I have to give that object type a name. So it's not a view table or whatever, it's soft strings. This weight here defines where it is shown in the connection window, the position. So we have to try it out where it lands in the end. Then below this object type, on a lower level here, I define the icon for the representation of these soft strings. This is the user icons. These are the soft strings are represented with this Oracle icon user. I can just reference existing icons in the 60 extensions. There are quite a lot there, but usually there are nothing fitting here for something like caller, font, or sprite. You would like to design them yourself, the icons, or import them, something like that. This is not possible with XML extensions. This is possible when you write the Java extension. You just have to bundle these resources somewhere. So it's not really complicated, but it's not working with plain user-defined extensions. And for these nodes, I have also a folder. This folder is this soft strings folder here. And for this folder, it's defined what its icon is. That's this star. This is the favorites icon. Again, I can just select something existing, and I can define a label. Usually, I have to also reference a key, a resource key. So the soft strings as resource does not exist, and the handle of non-existing resources is that it just prints the text of the key path. In this case, the result looks good, but you find some error message when you run this in SQL Developer. And then below that, there is the query, or the queries. In this case, you just need one. And it's important to note that the query is based on an XML schema which we used before in the editors and in the reports. So all the stuff I explained regarding min version and max version applies here too. That's something which you already know, so this part is nothing new. The rest is new. So how does the select look like? It's just a silly query, union all, to get the caller, font, and sprite as name here. And what I also have to provide is the object type, that soft strings. Technically, it's possible to mix several types and have here several icons based on the object type. It's a bit tricky to achieve that, but that's technically possible. So that's the navigator definition. But when I use a navigator, I don't want to use it alone. I want to associate object type as we've seen before with an editor. It's just something where I want to navigate and click on it and then get the details. So what I can do here also is to associate the soft drinks folder here with the nutritions they have. And you see here there is no tab for nutritions because it's just one editor associated. It will not be shown. It will only be shown when you have more, like when I click here on the cola, then I get the information, this is really nutrition, and I see the ingredients as a second editor below, behind it. So I can click on the ingredients and you see that. How editors work, we've seen that. The only difference is that we have introduced a new object type named soft drinks. Installation is the same as we've seen before. You just enter it here, and that's Navigators. A very powerful way to extend your SQL Developer are actions. What are actions? Here's an example. Let's consider we want to copy some table. I have here the navigation window. I click on depth table, click on create table as select, then a dialog pops up. With the context information, I can enter some data, a new table name, how many data I want to process. So we see here a table name which is entered as a alphanumeric text. You see here a radio group, and you see here also a combo box for this yes, no dialog. I press apply, and then the action will be executed behind the scene, and I get a confirmation dialog that the depth table has been copied to depth 2. That's an action. How does it look like in an XML file? It's something completely new. These are a separate set of XML schemas used here, and therefore we don't reuse things we used previously. It starts with the items. You define here the item type table. That's the association with the object type. And it's important that you can only select one type. It's not possible to define a list here. That does not work. You have to repeat that for every item you want. You can do that in the same XML file, but you cannot define an action for several object types as we've done that with reports or editors. And then we can define an unlimited number of prompts. This one here is for the table name, so that's the default. If I want to change the default, I have to define the type. For example, here the radio type, so it's a radio group for the rows in %, and then I have to define the values, so I get the radio buttons. And the last option is I can just define a combo box. In this case, I don't say it's type radio, I just leave it empty, but I defined a list of values. So it's no, yes, and then a combo box is generated. Then the next thing is I have to implement the code to be executed. That's between these SQL blocks here, and it's not really interesting how that works. It can be PL SQL or SQL, and you get some placeholders. That's the object owner, object type, object name. You have guessed that probably. The syntax looks similar to Apex, so it just replace everything in this code you have with the bind variables. And for the prompts, you have this 0, 1, and 2 in the hashes, and there will be replace 2, and therefore you can create a code which executes and behaves the way you want. That's PL SQL. But there's an option that you also write your code in JavaScript. And in this case, you don't define here SQL and SQL, it's script. And between that's JavaScript. That's a dialect included in the JDK, Narzone in fact. And so you may talk to include some Java classes and Java class instances, and therefore it's very well integrated in SQL Developer. The variables are a bit different. You have here the object owner and object name variables. You have also variables for prompts generated, but you have also utilities, an instance of the dbutil class, which allows you to execute code. It's the same dbutil you probably know from SQL CL if you write scripts there. So it's absolutely the same thing like in SQL CL. Everything you can do in SQL CL, you can do here as well. And then the last thing is I can define some help text if I like. There was a help text button, and the confirmation dialog ends with a prompt that the object has been copied to the target table. That's it. That's the action. The question is which object types are for which object types I can define actions. For all, basically. See here a link with more details. And you have placeholders for SQL and PL SQL actions. They are listed a lot here. Interesting to mention is object names. If you define the item with select mode both, multi-selection is possible, and then you don't have an object name, then you have an object names placeholder, which is a comma separated list, and you can do bulk processing. That's possible. And here you have an unlimited number of your other user-defined placeholders. For JavaScript, it looks similar. The advantage in JavaScript is that you have access to the Java environment and your local environment. It's not possible to access a file on your local drive from PL SQL. You have to make that available somehow. But from JavaScript, from your local SQL developer, that's possible. And that makes JavaScript so powerful. But it is also dangerous. So if you get from someone an action to be installed, just look at the code, what it does. It might be malware. How do you install such an action? It's the same thing as we've seen before. Nothing new. You have just to enter an action, the link to the XML file, restart SQL Developer. Let's look at JavaScript actions live. I click here on table M, right click, create table as select, JS, that's the JavaScript variant. Type in the new name, let's say we copy 50% of the data, and click here on the SQL tab. There you see the script to be executed, that's fine. Press apply, I get the confirmation dialog, and here my table M2, data, 50% of the data. We have a lot of standard actions in SQL Developer. You see that when I drop this created table, it looks familiar. When I press here on the SQL dialog, you see the table with the statement which is generated. I press apply and it is executed. So actions are a well-known concept in SQL Developer. Time for a summary. Everyone can write extensions. I say that because reports are very well integrated in SQL Developer. You may even copy an existing one. And editors are reports. Amending them is quite easy and make them available as an editor. Navigators and actions are a different story. They are really a bit more powerful and also a bit more complicated to master. Anyway, I recommend to have a look at my GitHub repository where I have all the examples I presented here there as well, and much more. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the SQL Developer space. I monitor them as well. The SQL Developer team monitors them. The chances are good that you get a useful answer. So I hope you enjoyed the talk and you start with your SQL Developer extension soon. Bye.